We continue on with the next keynote, and that is the Road to Excellence and Quality Culture for Software runs through IVV and TCOE. And delivering this keynote is Director of the Systems Testing Excellence Program at FedEx Institute of Technology, which is based at the University of Memphis. He serves as Professor and Chair of Information Systems at the university and is a graduate of the University of Malaya. And he also holds degrees from the University of British Columbia in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Dr. Jasbir Dhaliwal.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by telling you a little bit about what we do at the University of Memphis. We have something on campus called the FedEx Institute of Technology, and it's a think tank and a research accelerator as against an entrepreneurial accelerator. So we started in 2013. It's a collaboration with FedEx. So most of you will know FedEx is a $44 billion company based in Memphis. So a lot of the short-term innovation that happens at FedEx happens on their own campus. It's called their innovation lab. But longer-term innovation, they send it to us, the FedEx Institute of Technology, and they fund our work. And we have a beautiful building with about 95,000 square feet of innovation space, beautiful facilities. We have about 10 research centers that are in the building, and then we also have others that are across campus. But the key thing is what we emphasize is interdisciplinary areas is what we focus on. That's really our job is not to facilitate or fund any work that can be done in a single college. Only if multiple colleges, researchers from different areas come together to work together, then we are interested in funding them. At the same time, we are a comprehensive university. We have about at least slightly more than 1,000 PhD students on campus, more than 3,000 master students, most of them doing lots of research with professors. Now, the FedEx Institute of Technology is also home. It's also home to them, the graduate school. Now, just to give you some sense of the kind of work that goes on our campus, we are working with smart biomaterials. For example, if you get injured in a particular location of your body, what kind of stuff can we put in that wound so that the medicine you take is localized, and then how can we use magnets and other means? Again, we have engineers working with people from biology, from medical areas. That's just to give you one example. We have another group working out of the nursing school that's looking for what kind of games Alzheimer's people have to play. And cybersecurity is a big area for us, because that's a huge challenge. I mean, most people think that cybersecurity is about countries fighting each other. Not really. It's going to be companies fighting each other and individuals fighting each other using the internet as the means. But again, we fund a lot of this work. As a matter of fact, one of the things we are setting up now is the Tennessee Cybersecurity Test Range. If you do a lot of work for the Department of Defense like we do, and also some other people like Mark Kimmel, who was supposed to be here, you will realize that the old Army mindset is if you have a new weapon, you need a range to go and test it out, right? So these days, same thing with cybersecurity threats. You need a range where you go and test and play with the stuff using simulation and other methods. We also the FedEx Institute is also home to something called MD2K, Mobile Data to Knowledge initiative. This is funded by the National Institute of Health, and we are the lead university, with 12 other universities working. Ohio State, Berkeley, and others working on this project. But basically what it tries to do is it wires up people, for example, people with heart disease. It wires you up, captures all your medical information, and the data is sent remotely, to a big server. Literally, I think what Paul was talking about, we are capturing terabytes of data on a whole bunch of people who are moving around all over the world. So the next time you get a heart attack, it won't be you running to the hospital. Rather, about half an hour before your heart attack happens, your doctor is going to call you and say, I need you here, everything is ready, right? If you don't come, we are going to come and get you, right? So essentially, the world's moving into precision medicine and preventive healthcare, and the FedEx Institute of Technology is leading some of this effort. Now, in all these areas, people work across boundaries, and testing is a big issue. You know, all these kind of new technologies have to be tested, just like Paul before me was making the argument, right? We also have a lot of big data stuff going on in public health. Now, the Systems Testing Excellence Program is a program that I founded about 9-10 years ago at the University of Memphis. Same principle. It is not supposed to be just in computer science or computer engineering. We have people from engineering, information systems, all working together. That is what distinguishes the STEP program from any other research program in software testing in the whole country. As a matter of fact, the reason today STEP is the largest group of software testing researchers working is, one, it is applied. We do work with companies and DoD, and second thing is because we have a group of people that cut across interdisciplinary boundaries. So as testers of tomorrow, if you want to test all this kind of stuff, you know, preventive medicine, heart, and all these gadgets all over the place, it will force you to go beyond your boundaries. And we want to train students, we want to train researchers in that space. Now, the STEP program, I'm no longer running it. This is probably my last time I'm talking about testing at SoftTech. If I can, my colleague is here. Robin, you want to stand up for a minute? Robin is the new director of the STEP program, right? So please give her, please welcome her to your community, and over the next years, please Malaysianize her, you know, because that's the best place to grow up. You know, you really grow up with an interdisciplinary global mindset. There's no better country in the world to give you that, you know, that innovation spark that Malaysia can give you. So thank you, Robin. Now, we have other institutes that are at the FedEx Institute of Technology. I won't spend time on them, but essentially, just to follow up to what Paul was talking about, you know, once you have to test everything, it's going to take a lot of different mindset. It's all about crossing boundaries, folks, you know, believe me or not, and that's where the future is going to be. As a matter of fact, even I was arguing yesterday, let us not take ourselves too seriously as just testers. Let's not put boundaries around the work we do, because the kind of stuff we'll be testing is going to be very different. So we want people in music to come into testing. You know, we want people in so many different backgrounds. That is where the future really is going to be, right? Having said that, you know, this is, you know, it's been about 8 years now since SoftTech started, and Mastura and Amir and Puan Aziza came over and told me about the wonderful experiment they were doing here to really literally set up a software testing transformation in this country. And I've been part of the journey and just been marveled at how organized and systematic they are. I want to congratulate them, literally. I wish other countries in the world, you know, I wish the United States of America, you know, would do what Malaysia is doing in terms of trying to organize a national initiative in this space. I think it's needed in some space, and so I've seen that. And one of the things I'm going to talk to you today is this concept called IVV, right? And something called the Testing Center of Excellence, TCOE, right? Now, unlike all the things Paul was telling about, these are actually very old concepts. They're not new at all, but they are so important. They are so important in helping get a culture of quality, you know, especially in the public sector, you know, where change is harder to implement sometimes simply because of the natural characteristics of the public sector, right? So I just want to take you back how long ago. This whole concept of IVV came up in the 50s, you know, when the Atlas missile program was designed based, I think, mostly in Huntsville, Alabama, right? And the problem they had then is a problem that still exists today. And the problem is that software developers tend to give you these overly optimistic estimates about how the project is going, right? Oh, everything is fine, right? So at that time, you know, when you are sending a huge rocket that costs us millions of dollars into space, you can't afford to take chances. So at that time, some smart people realized that, one of the ways to overcome that is to get independent V&V people, independent testers. And I would argue that we as a discipline, as a bunch of professionals, we have forgotten that element of independence. And because we as testers forgot that being independent was so important to us, the developers took us for a long ride for 20 years, believe me. And I argue that in the future, unless we become independent again and stronger in terms of offering our opinions from a truly independent perspective, we will go back to the same situation we were in the last few years. As a matter of fact, I would argue that more and more in outsourced testing, more and more companies are going to demand independent, honest opinions from their vendors, rather than just automating something or not even automating it, just doing it with cheaper labor. So I argue the future is going to be very different even in outsourced testing, right? So based out of that work, this seemed to work, in situations that were high risk. The risk tolerance was very low, and a whole bunch of, to those of you who are academics who really care about rigorous, study of concepts, a whole bunch of studies kind of started to appear that actually showed that projects with independent quality assurance perform better than projects without them, right? So there is some empirical basis to the concept of IVV, and to those of you who want to track this down and say, now, if you look at a field like accounting, maybe in accounting too, the auditors are always independent. They not only do they have to be independent, they have to be seen to be independent. The accounting folks have done all kind of experiments into the nature of the degree and the nature, the type of independence and the degree of independence and how it impacts quality, quality of financial statements in their case, but in our case, quality of software. You know what I mean? So it's nothing new. It's not rocket science that IVV is something new. No, other fields have been doing it for a long time, right? So we have kind of literature we have to build on and modernize. But the whole notion is IVVs work. IVVs is a way to get discipline. Just like the fact that you have external auditors gives discipline into the financial reporting process. Same thing. Independent verification and validation leads to quality of software, and if it becomes the standard in any group, let's say the public sector, it will lead to quality of software development, and that's a culture you want, literally, right? Now let me take you in a big jump. Since I took you all the way to 1950s, I think it's time to jump to 2015, right? Now, you can learn this lesson about having independent verification and validation in a very easy way, right? And the easy way is what Malaysia did. Malaysia did it by passing guidelines that from 2016 for acquisition of software projects and IVV engagement would be required, pretty much, right? Now, or you can learn the hard way. NASA has a beautiful IVV facility in Western Virginia. It's a great place that you folks should go visit. They have about 270 folks, in their TCOE just working on IVV stuff, because that's how seriously they take it in that sense. And it is a very sophisticated place, where mathematical modeling, testing involving mathematical modeling is done, simulation systems. Now, they actually provide those services to private sector too, or anybody can go and engage those services, if you require them. But again, they learned it the hard way. The TCOE at NASA wasn't set up until after the Challenger disaster. So you either learn, by being progressive, or you learn the hard way. Right? But the key is they have succeeded with it. Right? Now, in the public sector, in the US today, IVV is a best practice. They call it by different names. Some states, we have about 50 states in the US. Most of you will know from the number of stars on our flag, right? But literally every state has different guidelines in terms of IVV. Some government agencies have their own handbooks, of best practices. And the handbook and the best practices ties the IVV testing to usually their systems life cycle for development, or even the maturity of all this, the enterprise models that they use as well. So it's a pretty sophisticated world, but one thing you will realize, there is no simple answer to it, right? So again, the lesson for Malaysia as you develop your handbook is you need models for IVV implementation that work for your environment. What we have found in working with MSTB is the financial approval process in Malaysia is fairly complex. Involves multiple agencies, multiple committees, lots of documentation. So which means you have to find models that work for you in that sense, right? As a matter of fact, I think what MSTB and the EPU did was the smartest thing in the world. Before you jump into something wholesale, right? Make sure you pilot test it, right? So as a matter of fact, what they did do was to do 8 pilots over the last couple of 3 years, I think. And so based out of that, they have a lot of lessons learned. And what my group has been doing is we have been trying to merge the local lessons learned together with the experience in North America, and to kind of find out what will work from IVV perspective in Malaysia. And once that is finalized, I think this November it will be launched for the benefit of not just the public sector, the private sector as well, right? If you are producing high, software with low risk tolerance, you will have to learn about IVVs too. In that way, virtually every large company in the US, that does software testing in a significant way has a TCOE, a testing center of excellence, irrespective of what they call it. And the important thing is that the TCOE is the keeper of that handbook. So that's something. Now this is the specific law, not the goal, the guidelines, what they call that, were published in Malaysia, right? So the first one says, for projects that are critical and have high impact to the government, agencies must identify the need to procure SQA software testing for the procurement of the ICT systems from an independent third-party provider, right, to ensure the project fulfills the determined standards. So this is going to change the way software is purchased in Malaysia. It's going to put a lot of discipline on vendors who develop software for the public sector, right? The agencies must ensure that the third party, right, are recognized and accredited by the Department of Standards in Malaysia, and the third party must be appointed and be directly involved from the start of development of the system until its handover to the government. As a matter of fact, it even goes beyond the handover to the maintenance and implementation of the system. So this is going to change things quite a bit in your world, right? And one of the principles of IVV is that it is not something you do at the end. You don't develop a piece of software and then say, now a third-party provider will come in. It is not like financial statements, that accountants do. It's going to be quite different. And my suggestion, would be to define critical and high-impact projects as liberally as you can, because like when I was calling around to many different IVVs in the US and trying to gather words of wisdom, someone used the word bureaucratic habits. He says, look, you just use this on a few projects, that are, either in aerospace or in dealing with radioactive stuff. You should try to make the use of IVV models so commonplace, so much as, the term he used was bureaucratic habits. And habits are central to changing a culture. So you got to just, kind of put independent verification and validation into how you develop all kinds of systems. So that's really key. Now here's an example, from one state where the state Commissioner of Education, in our 50 states, they all have a governor, and then the governor has ministers. We don't call them ministers, we call them commissioners in some states, right? Otherwise, they are called Secretary of State or Secretary of Education. Now, in one state, over the weekend, they were supposed to launch a system that was going to impact a lot of students, right? So those of you from Ministry of Education here, you better listen carefully, right? They wanted to implement a system that was going to impact a lot of students, who are applying for university. Now, the weekend before the release, they found a whole bunch of defects, and some of them they couldn't find the root causes. Now, of course, the Commissioner of Education, he just wants to know how serious. So he kept asking the CIO, the state CIO, what should we do? And the CIO said, it's your decision, sir. Can you see what I mean? And both of them were frozen, the politician and the CIO. Can you see what I mean? Because of these defects. Now, in such a situation, both of them would have been so happy to say, wow, if only now we can get an independent third-party opinion. And I think those independent third-party opinions, now, if today your company has outsourced testers from any company, now, do you think they will give you an independent opinion to help you make these kind of decisions? Now, for the CIO, your job may be on the line, right? But if you're a politician, it's even more dangerous, because remember, if the system fails dramatically, it'll be all over the media. Remember, that's the nature of public sector work in that sense, right? So this is again, like I said, these are the kind of scenarios where IVVs are so critical in the public sector. You are spending public's money, you have their trust, and the public demands services that are efficient, the public demands that the data will be protected, right? And so these are the kind of scenarios that call for IVV, call for independent testers to come and give honest, sincere opinions. These are not situations that say, oh, I outsourced my testing to this company and now they come and solve it. No, they can't solve it in this case, right? If all you did was to outsource your testing to some company that is providing you cheap labor, they're not going to give you an honest opinion. And I think this is where I'm trying to distinguish in your heads and my world that outsourced testing and IVV are two fundamentally different constructs. And this is a construct we lost on our way, except in the public sector, and I think we need to go back to that as well, right? So again, I mentioned just now the political consequences for the politician masters, right? And then there are a whole bunch of intangibles, and risk aversion. The more risk aversion. Now, all of you have heard about how when our attempt at universal healthcare called healthcare.gov, remember Obamacare we call it, when it was launched, right? I mean, now there's case study evidence that has appeared, Now literally they didn't have time. There was the release date of the software was defined, and everybody was working crazily to meet that deadline that testing wasn't really done. As a matter of fact, if they had an IVV arrangement in place, healthcare.gov, the mess that it was in the early days wouldn't have happened. And it cost the Secretary of Health, I think her position, Sibylis. Remember, she had to resign, at the end of the day because of that blunder. I mean, the consequences in the public sector are huge in that sense, right? So as a matter of fact, when I was collecting the data, someone at a very high level even told me, he says, that example itself, right, is reason enough for us to mandate it. That means make it a law that for large IT projects serving citizens, right, that it should be a requirement, right? Now, the concept of independence is again not new. Okay, I think most IVV literature will go back to the IEEE's 2004 standard that literally took independence and said there must be three kinds of independence: technical independence, managerial independence, and financial independence, right? And recently, people have added a new dimension to it as well that is outside the standard. They call it operational independence as well. I better not spend too much time. I'm going to put my clock right here, guys. Yeah. I don't want to stand between you and the goodies at the end of the conference, right? So I won't spend a lot of time, but you will have the concept of this stuff. So essentially, we have the definitions. So there are different kinds of independence. The nature of independence and the degree of independence are really critical to the relationship, the IVV relationships that you... Now, I spoke about the accounting, how accountants do auditing, which is like testing. And there are many other disciplines that do this. And like, for example, the National Transportation Safety Board in the U.S., each time there's a plane crashes anywhere in the world, right? The National Transportation Safety Board's investigators are there within a day or two. Why? Because they want to know what the root cause is. The moment you know the root cause, it helps us. Remember the risk analysis, the factors. Once you can identify the part, you can make flying even safer. And the reason is because they are independent, they are neutral, right? And they have all the techniques and all the models, all the data ready to plug in based on the characteristics of even the crash site in that way. So we in testing are not the first people, like I said, to think about independent testing and look at the quality and safety, the airline industry enjoys, or we all enjoy, as a matter of fact, So that's the kind of rigor that you need. Now, the other concept, as you get into IVV, especially those of you who are in the private sector, right, now this is really important. This whole concept called capacity augmentation, right, capability augmentation. No company out there can afford to maintain all the different kinds of testing tools, capabilities, skills in the world. It's just not possible. And I'm not talking about the IoT world. I'm talking about even current, the current world. It's just the economies of scale just don't warrant that, right? So one of the reasons why a lot of government agencies and other larger companies seek IVV is so that they can augment the current capabilities that they have, right? The nature of every software application we develop is different. The risk characteristics of that application is different. And nowhere can you maintain all the tools, all the skills in one place. Unless, of course, you set up like a national TCOE. Remember, just like my TCOE, if you saw in the Mampu booth in the conference. So again, this thing about and IVV relationships are partnerships, but they're partnerships that offer independence to the independence input into all decisions. Now, here's another scenario that basically talks about that. This is from the defense sector. This is from someone in defense who used to, who actually hired John Hager's old company. The company that John Hager's company actually provided the services in this case, right? Now, this is a quotation from him. He says, "Test and evaluation skills and tools are too complex, too sophisticated, too expensive, and too fast-moving to acquire, nurture, and maintain. We use external long-term IVV partner, that understands my context, has a cutting-edge testing facility, and invests in research on industry best practices." And the handbook captures those industry best practices. So again, testing and evaluation is not part of that company's core capabilities. And they didn't want to just increase their budgets by hiring a whole bunch of testers specialized in different things. It makes no sense. So what you need is a good framework, a good legal framework in Malaysia, a good technical framework in Malaysia to facilitate IVV relationships, and you solve that problem, literally. And now, the other thing is, the best way to understand IVV as you look forward is, now IVV is not really all about testing. It is about something bigger than testing. Now, if you just Google on the net, what are the reasons why software fails, right? If you just Google why software fails, never will you find out, never will you, in the top 10 list, you will never find out because testing wasn't done or the wrong testing was done. Testing hardly ever features in the top 10 list of why software fails. But you know what happens? I think most of you know my friend from FedEx, who was one of the founders of the STEP program, Dave Miller. He's not here this year. Dave is retiring this year. And again, so STEP is going through quite a transformation stage. Now, this is a line from Dave. I call it the Dave dilemma, right? He says when something doesn't work out there in the production environment, guess the CIO and all the business vice presidents, they'll call him up and said, "How come testing didn't catch it? How come you guys didn't get it?" Can you see me? Now, as if the role of testing is to catch every single defect, right? But again, if you look at the sources of why, the factors that lead to software failure, they are very often about project management. They're very often about poor requirements. They're very often problems with organizational politics, with poor communications, right? Now, the testing that me and you do, like regression tests and functional tests and load testing, you think this is going to catch all those factors? Obviously, they're not. So let's not pretend we testers are here to catch all the reasons why software fails. Software fails for bigger reasons than testing. And IVVs, the concept of an IVV is a mechanism, it's purely a simple organizational strategy mechanism to give us influence or even control over these factors. If you as a low-level tester go to the PMO, the project manager, and say, let me tell you, let me help you align the quality plan to the project plan, he will probably thank you and send you on your way. Can you see what I mean? But with the concept of an IVV, the concept of IVV literally argues for the test lead or the test manager having a big role in project management issues. As a matter of fact, in the space exploration world, when you're sending up a rocket into space, that costs billions of dollars. If that one component that you are responsible for, if you think that component is unreliable, you have veto power over the project manager. You can say, I don't care if the clouds around Houston have parted for the rocket to leave. I am not sure about this component, it may blow up. You have veto power. Can you see how testers can be? Now, IVV is a mechanism for us to get that kind of leverage over project management. So our job as testers, not just to say, well, I did all my testing and the project failed. No. We have a responsibility. If we know that project management issues may lead to project failure, we have a responsibility to get some influence over project management issues. As a matter of fact, in high-risk situations where the system's success is so critical, the testers can run the project management office. The question is, are you and I, as testers today, are we ready to run a project management office? Well, in some of the defense sectors, they do. In the space sector, in aeronautical science, in some areas, they have that kind of cloud. And the key is, are the testers respected for their ability to take over some of these responsibilities, and also are they independent? If you are not independent, if the TMO, the Testing Management Office, is not independent, it makes no difference whether you have influence over the project management office or not. So in the models in the handbook, in models in the handbook, the IVV handbook, they're going to give you a range of relationships between the PMO and the TMO, the project management and the testing management office. Those relationships are really, really critical to the success of the IVV concept. Right? I'll give you another example from a company. For a company we work with. For many years, I was telling this company, look, you have so many different software development teams. The testers know which teams are good and which teams are bad. And I said, look, publish that data every year. They would not do that. Why? Because they were not independent testers. Because next day, they will still have to work with them. And in some ways, we had a dependent relationship with the developers. But 3 years later, when they set up their TCOE, right, and started providing independent testing, then they started publishing the data. And guess what? Overnight, the culture changed. Overnight, the groups that were yielding the most defects, right, changed. The leadership changed. The whole teams changed because now there was objective, independent data being published in this large organization that clearly identified where the bulk of the defects were coming from which group, right? So as long as we conceptualize our role as testers as being kind of dependent, right, you can't do things like that. Just a simple thing like publishing the defects by which development groups it came from changed the software quality culture of that organization. There's not much you have to do. You just have to publish data. So one of the roles of a TCOE is to publish data. If it is a national level TCOE, like for example Malaysia is planning, Mampu is planning, then there will be data available across by categories of applications, data about the defects, type of defects found, and they should be out in the open marketplace in that way. And if you are providing, if you're a developing company providing development services to the government, you better be ready for this. If you are the source of the bulk of your defects, that will be open, it will be an open secret now in that way, right? And that's the only way the culture, will change. So this will change a lot of things in your world, believe me, but it will change them for the better, right? And, sorry, I was going backwards here, right? Now, but more than that, the models for IVV need to be firm in the sense that you don't want to have a gaming environment where government agencies are trying to find wiggle room to get out of an IVV relationship, right? Because it'll only hurt and delay things for the longer term. So they have to be firm, but at the same time they have to be flexible to capture the diversity of contexts and the diversity of applications that government agencies develop in that sense. So one of the things that usually get tagged on in IVV relationships are other kinds of augmentation services. Like I spend a lot of time talking about the project management office, risk analysis. Like for example, I gave you the example of the National Transportation Safety Board, right? They have risk metrics on every single component that goes into every single plane, right? In the nuclear power industry, if you for example, many years ago I did a project up in Canada with the CANDU reactor, right? If you're going to put a nuclear reactor close to some cities, you better know the risk characteristics of every component, every module of software, right? And now, so risk analysis and control, where the quality plan is driven by the risk analysis. As a matter of fact, the TMO, in that situation, the test management office was actually called the risk management office. Consider me now. And that was even more powerful, and I was a budding PhD student at that time when I got thrown into this project, and boy did I learn. I learned the value of independence in testing, right? Now, in other situations, very often there is, a difference of opinion on what the requirements actually are in many situations. So this is where a IVV partner can be the honest broker or can be the honest representative of the users. We have seen that as well. Now NASA offers sophisticated modeling tools. They call it dynamic modeling and simulation. To anyone out there, who's working in this space. Now this is an example of what I meant. Augmentation. You may be the IVV provider, but you may not have these testing services. But these are very often tagged on. For example, if you are creating an IVV relationship for something so significant, and as Malaysia goes up, the technical sophistication ladder into aerospace products and so on, right, aeronautical products, then you will need that very high level. You'll need a culture of excellence in quality, in software, but also in other kinds of components, and it's hard to. So again, I want to remind you again that the whole concept of IVV centers on this notion that you want influence and control about anything that may lead to software failure. If you can understand that, you can understand that this is taking a very broad perspective to testing. It's arguing that just because you tested something, it doesn't mean it's going to work. The project is going to work. So there are bigger factors, and testers need some influence over those bigger factors, right? Now, this is just an example. You can get on the web about the dynamic analysis that NASA provides. Now, here are some. The Department of Homeland Security was set up by combining a whole bunch of government departments in the federal government, and the federal government in the U.S. is big. Even in dollar terms, even in human terms. Now, as a result of that, they put together a whole range of IT systems. All the way. Some of you who travel a lot to the U.S. will know the USCIS system. That's the one where the immigration system, when you land in the U.S. now, your passports go through a certain thing. Now, these were massive systems that were developed over a very short period of time.
Now this is again on the web. This is now. You just, if you look on the column side, the first thing was establish risk-based criteria, establish standards for independence. Can you see what I mean? So this is a large government agency that was tasked with developing IT systems very quickly to take on the challenge of September 11. And boy, did they work really hard. And they used IVV as a core central construct to get the systems developed. So this is, I wanted to give you a case study of how large government departments, literally use IVVs to drive. So this is from a high-level dashboard where they're actually measuring different dimensions of an IVV relationship, across. Now, literally the flow of an IVV arrangement, like I said, most of the handbooks and most of the guidelines that government departments in the U.S. use literally go through the whole cycle. Whole cycle until a system literally is put to bed, right from inception, right from day one. The IVV partner essentially should be involved even in feasibility analysis in that sense, right? Now here's a chart that is that is going to be at the core of the IVV handbook, the Malaysian IVV handbook, right? So if you notice a few things, one at the very top, right? There will be a TMO with varying levels of responsibility that will have defined stage gates. This TMO will produce reports at each quality gate. That one will go to the government agency, the steering committee of the government agency that is commissioning the application. But at the same time, these reports will also go to the TCOE that Mampu is setting up, because a key part of the TCOE is the data in that sense. Now the second thing I want to emphasize to you is, if you notice, there's early testing. At the same time, at the tail end, there's other kinds of testing as well. Now look at the bottom at the different kinds of testing that is possible. Now all of you know, if I ask you to make a list of all the different kinds of tests you can do, once I got some of my students to do it, and one guy came up with 143 different kinds of tests. You don't have to do all of them, and they overlap quite a bit, right? But the hardest thing and the smartest thing that anyone can do in testing is test planning. The TCOE at Mampu, my TCOE, will develop the capacity and the capability to advise each government project from any of the government agencies as to which are the kinds of tests. Now the ones in red are the ones that have been used in the pilots that have been done so far. But the key part will be deciding the risk, this is the risk involved in the failure of this software project, and then identifying the right. So again, test planning now will be the responsibility of an independent third party. Can you see what I mean? Of course, that in the contracts it will be negotiated, but again, you want independent input into the test planning process, right? Now, Malaysia has a certification. You can certify your software, the QS 9136 scheme. Now, that is also integrated into the IVV process, because certification and providing independent input is a really key part of it, right? Now, I've already mentioned that you can't have a handbook of IVV best practices, but then you have no keeper of it. Every book has to have a keeper. Even religious books have to have a keeper. Even scientific books have to have a keeper. Like for example, we have the Library of Congress in the U.S. And so same thing. The keeper of this handbook, responsible for updating, will be the IVV, right? Sorry, the keeper of the IVV handbook will be the TCOE. And like I said, NASA has a really. You can go onto the IVV homepage. Just Google NASA IVV, and like I said, they do phenomenal stuff out there. And so just to jump to TCOE, these are some of the things the TCOE will do. As the keeper of the handbook, right, it will promote the handbook, it will train people in the handbook, it will enforce the handbook too. Given because it's a government agency, it's their responsibility. Of course, it will advise, given the nature of the applications, and again, it will update and research the best practices to keep the handbook relevant to the local context, right? I mentioned earlier about the report that it produce. That the reporting, once you start reporting metrics about software development, testing improves, the quality goes up. So it will have a data and analytics function. Now the other function is, like I mentioned, centralized and standardized services, right? Now be careful when you read the literature. A lot of outsourcing, test outsourcing firms use the concept TCOE too, to try to sell you centralized outsourced testing services, but be very careful with that, right? This is completely different in that sense, right? They will also nurture cutting edge, like for example, Microsoft, in Seattle, Microsoft Research has a software reliability group. I visited there, I've spent time with those. They constantly bring practitioners, like for example, at this conference you have met, there were at least, I've met 10, 20 very good practitioners who really know the field so well. These are the kind of people who will go to Microsoft Research to work with the academic researchers there. You'll find professors there. They're all working on cutting-edge best practices. And that's what IVVs promote. That's what the TCOE will do. It will provide that environment for creating Malaysian thought leaders on this topic as well. Right? At the same time, the tool repository. So these are some of the functions of TCOE, whether it's in the government or, right? So again, I want to emphasize a few things about, please separate in your mind, outsourced testing is a very different from an IVV relationship, right? An IVV relationship is both a procurement model and a software testing governance construct, right? Now, you can take IV relationships and integrate them with the project management aspects, right? Now, the difference, main difference is outsourced testing as is practiced today, right, has little independence, has little incentive to innovate. I talk to a lot of CIOs of Fortune 500 companies in the US, and that's their biggest problem. They are, once you outsource something, you lose the internal, there's atrophy. You lose the skills in your organization, and your outsourcing vendor has no incentive to automate or innovate. And that's a huge problem in that industry. And then they don't have any decisional input. Now, the outsourcing vendors are not interested in providing decisional input because they don't want the responsibility. IVVs change that in that sense, right? So again, now let me just rush through this. I don't want to hold you up too long, right? Now, the concept of a TCOE is not new. As a matter of fact, every day we find new applications on it. In the US now, the TCOEs are merging into cybersecurity testing. I gave you the example. Remember at the bottom in the red, we in Tennessee, as a matter of fact, I and Robin are leading an effort to set up the Tennessee Cyber Test Range, for cybersecurity as well. So those two are actually one. And the concept we are using is exactly the same. We are using a TCOE, right, and combined with IVV best practices. So what Malaysia is doing is, like I said, it's been around for a long time. It's coming back. It's so important to the success of testing in the future. And I won't take a lot more time. The slides will be available, and like for example, selecting an IVV partner. What are some of the things that you look for, right? So let me stop here. Like I said, so think very carefully about this notion of independence. Even the president of ISTQB, remember yesterday about this time when the panel was going on, he mentioned the term separation of duties, right? That's another term for independence, right? So let's bring independence back into testing again. It will get us more respect as testers. It will mean there's more responsibility for us as testers now. When you're independent, you have an honest responsibility. But again, there's flexibility in the IVV concept. It's about principles. And some of you who attended the session earlier today, remember Dr. Robin Poston went through some of the principles, right? And it's about choices that you make, right? But the choices are not open-ended. There are fixed models that you should follow. So with that, I'll stop here, and will be happy to take any questions. Hopefully, I didn't take up too much time. I apologize if I do. Thank you. Any questions?